Hey everybody, thanks so much for checking out Better Student Ministry. My name's Mark Freeman and this is Jared Barry, and together we have over 30 years of youth ministry experience.
We hope this resource was a blessing to you and your team. Along with every training video, we've included a downloadable PDF filled with discussion questions for you to wrestle through and contextualize the topic we've discussed. If you guys are interested in doing a deeper dive, we also have a podcast that's available where Mark and I talk a lot more about the topics we've talked about today. You can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, and Facebook by simply searching Better Student Ministry. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Better Student Ministries. My name's Jared.
And I'm Mark.
So glad you guys are with us, and we're excited to dive into our topic today, which is all about answering the question, the why behind the what. In youth ministry, we do a lot of things, and sometimes it's easy to just do them without thinking about why we're doing them.
Yeah.
So we actually want to share with you guys three topics which we took from David Hertwick's book on youth ministry called Good Kids, Big Events, and Matching T-Shirt. It's all about rethinking health and youth ministry. Yeah. We also do a deep dive podcast with David.
Good one.
Really good. We encourage you guys to go over, check that out. And we'll spend over 30 minutes talking to him about these topics. But let's dive in, Mark, quick. The first topic is the idea of good kids. And this is basically the idea that in youth ministry, sometimes we think it's all about getting kids to behave, act like good kids. When in reality, we're not trying to change behavior. We're trying to help them have heart transformation, which only happens in the gospel. So what are some practical ways for you, Mark, in youth ministry that you focused on this good kids idea, not going after behavior transformation, but rather heart transformation?
Yeah, I think one of the places that it showed up the most, at least it was the most glaring, was in interactions I had with parents. And what their expectations were of the youth group, and to some degrees, like what their hopes were that we would fix in the lives of their kids, right?
Change my kids.
And I think their intentions are good, and they want their kids to be healthy and happy and balanced and avoiding making terrible decisions and things like that. And so, but helping them understand what our role is as accountable adult leaders, helping them understand how we see the function of our youth group, which honestly really differentiates between like a boys and girls club, which I'm not saying are bad, but the difference between an environment like that and a gospel-centered, organization and place where kids come to hear about Christ so that their lives could be transformed by the gospel. There's a big difference between the two of those. Yeah. And so I don't know about you, but I remember so many conversations with parents where youth group was used as a leveraging tool, either for the good or the bad related to behavior issues. So they either couldn't go on a retreat or they couldn't go to youth group because they had done something bad, or they had to go to this retreat or they had to go to youth group because of the bad decisions that they were making. And so clearly that was an indicator to me that there was a misconnect between what the expectations of the group is and what our intended purpose is. And the key was just communicating with the parents, helping them understand we come along beside you to help point them to Jesus so that their lives can be transformed. Because we talk about this in the podcast a lot. Actually, we've talked about this in a lot of our episodes. If the gospel isn't transforming their heart, we're teaching them to look like Christians without having a heart of Christ in them, where the Holy Spirit can transform what's going on in their hearts. And basically we teach them how to look like good kids, how to look like Christian kids, but we set them up for disaster because their heart has not been transformed by the gospel yet. And so they're striving, they're working, they're putting on a disguise of this is what a Christian's supposed to look like, sound like, and then when they fail again and again and again, they don't have the redeeming forgiveness of Christ, they don't have the power of the Holy Spirit working through them, so it's inevitable that ultimately they will fail, and then there's guilt, and then the enemy whispers in their ear, and so helping our parents understand, yes, let's let the end goal, let the symptoms of the gospel transforming their heart turn into behavior change, but let that not be the goal of how we push their hearts towards Christ and allow the Holy Spirit to kind of root out some of that stuff that's going on in their lives.
I think in line with that, when discussing with parents, you talked about language. And one of the tips that I would give our youth leaders is when it comes to language, we would not use a language of, when we're talking about sin, of doing something bad, but we would try to use the language of idolatry. And the idea is that what are you trusting in more than Jesus? Because every behavioral sin, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing, is rooted in something we're trusting in more than Christ. And so we would use that language in our preaching, but we would also use that language in our everyday conversation with each other, in our counseling with students, and with parents. We would say, well, here's what you have to know. Every sin, every behavior is a symptom of something that's being trusted in more than Jesus.
Yeah.
And if we can help students to realize that, it'll change their conversation, their perception, and we're showing them the goal is not to just get you to look the part, but we actually want to see your heart transform.
This is a great parenting tip as well. It's something that helps keep me as a gospel-centered parent rooted in when I'm dealing with issues with my kids. Because it's so easy for me as the parent to just be like, deal with the behavior issue. Stop doing this. Stop doing this.
Yep.
But I'm not really teaching them how Christ is able to partner with them and do some of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
The second area that we talk about in the second area that Dave talks about in his book is this idea of big events, right? We get hyped up for these big events. We launch into these big events. We promote the heck out of them. But there's got to be something more than just the big events. So talk to us a little bit about your thoughts here.
Yeah. For so long in youth ministry, we had these events, these retreats that they come and go like that.
Yeah.
And before you know it, I remember being home or on my drive back and feeling like, man, did I really take advantage of the time we had? And so I want to encourage you guys, you youth leaders, when you're entering specifically if you're doing like an overnight retreat or a trip or something like that, go into it with the idea of targeted discipleship.
Yeah.
So if you're responsible for a handful of students, maybe it's the ones that are in your room, maybe it's the ones that you have a small group with, go into it thinking, number one, how can I start praying for these kids at a time? Number two, is there one or two students who are maybe on the fringe, who are kind of disconnected, who maybe are not really serving Jesus the way I want to see them? What moments can I find in this weekend, on this trip, in this event, where I can really target conversation with them?
Yeah.
And so I would encourage our leaders to go into it with those one or two kids in mind.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, what can happen is the business of the weekend, the business of the trip can go, everyone's having fun, before you know it, you go by, and the kids that maybe you were more inclined to hang with, or the kids that sought you out more, got all of your time and attention.
Yeah.
And the ones who probably needed it the most didn't get it because we weren't intentional with them.
Yeah, I think doing your homework a little bit before an event, as you were kind of alluding to, is going to be a big win for you at an event like this. And so the first conversation that you have with a student shouldn't be at the event, right? We should do the before event work. You always hear youth leaders and different leaders say, be praying for this event that's coming up. And a lot of times you're like, okay, what exactly am I praying for? I'll pray that their hearts are ready, and I'll pray that, which are all great prayers. But how about the weeks leading up to it, you have some really intentional conversations knowing there's a retreat weekend coming up.
Yeah.
So that when you launch into that event, you as the leader have already had several conversations with students. You know specifically what you want to be praying for, what they're going to be praying for. Not only are you preparing expectation in their own hearts, but now you can come right alongside them during that weekend. And you don't have to try to figure out what's going on. You already know. So boom, you can go right into a response to a message, or you can have a great conversation where you're pulling a kid aside when we're just kind of hanging out in the evening, and it happens naturally, and the kid's not like, you're talking to me for the first time, what's going on here?
Right.
But you've done the work of preparing for the event to take advantage of that break away from the norm moments, and you can hit the ground running, and then you can be praying for those specific things leading up to the event. So I think doing a little bit of that front end work then makes the event that much better.
Yeah.
And then on the back end of the event, you know how to follow up with them because it's just a continuation of what's been going on.
Yeah, I love that idea, and that helps too. And one last tip I would say is look for the disengaged student.
Yeah, please.
And that is, you're able to do that when you've done your homework.
Yeah.
So don't just allow when everyone else is engaged in worship or everyone else is part of it and there's one student that's off inside. Don't just sit there and let that happen.
Yeah.
Right? Go after that disengaged student, sit down, have a conversation with them.
Yeah.
And if you've done the homework like you said, that becomes way easier.
And if you haven't planned for it, if you aren't prepared for it, it's such a busy weekend. It doesn't just happen organically sometimes. Like it has to be prepared for. It has to be thought through because you got a million other things that you're doing during the weekend.
Yep.
So be prepared for it, be planned for it, and I believe it's going to set you up
Yeah.
for success. The last part that we want to talk about is this idea of matching t-shirts. He talks about it in the book, but essentially what that is this idea of we're creating a community of people together. And the reality he talks about in the book is this idea that it's a random accumulation of students that wouldn't for any other reason be in the room other than there's a desire to find out more about who Jesus is, what he's doing in their lives, and we're going to band together for that purpose.
Yeah.
And so give us some thoughts related to this topic.
Yeah. At the end of the day, what unites us is the mission of Christ
Yeah.
and our identity in him. So one of the tips that I would encourage you to do is, as a youth leader, hopefully you're spending time with your students outside of a youth gathering. So this could look like playing video games, playing basketball, whatever you're into. And those are awesome, right? We want those times of just hanging out, relational time. But what I would encourage you to do is leverage those moments not just to hang out, but also to engage in mission.
Yeah.
So look for opportunities to serve people in your church, serve neighbors, and invite your students to be with you as you serve the mission of God. It's one thing to play basketball, but it's another thing to be raking the yard of an elderly woman from your church as you're hanging out and having conversation.
Yeah.
You're modeling to them what most unites us is Jesus and his mission. And so I would encourage you as a youth leader to think through your hangout times with your students and say, how can I incorporate mission into what we're doing?
One of the things I want to kind of leave us with some thoughts related to, and this kind of ties into the first idea that we had as well, is how do we deal with some behavior issues as a group in a group setting? How do we create environments where all of this discipleship stuff can take place, right? And a lot of times I felt like my energy was drawn towards dealing with the kid who won't stop talking during the service, or the kid who's creating issues before or after service, the relational tension and the bits and pieces of, I got to deal with the personal stuff before I can even get into the gospel stuff sometimes I felt like. And so one of the encouragements I want to have us think about is how do we think about the behavior issues in light of the mission and the gospel piece, right? So instead of talking to the student about, you got to be quiet when we're talking, and you got to, contribute better, and don't make fun of this person's thoughts and ideas when they're talking in a small group setting, things like that. But frame it around the gospel and the community that God is trying to create, and talk about this idea of we want to create an environment where kids, where your peers feel safe, where you feel safe, where you can share with some vulnerability, where you can encourage one another, where we can think and go deep, and instead of just addressing behavior issues, talk to community issues. And then in reality, and sometimes in the most extreme circumstances, then if there's an issue and someone's just not fitting into the community, and I know we hate to think about this idea, but the reality is one person cannot dominate the group and at the expense of the others. And so you give time and you pace with them, but at the end of the day, now we're talking about the community and the overall health of the community, and how do we address those behavior issues. It's not any longer this kid just won't be quiet, or they won't be respectful, or they won't deal this. There's a reason why we're gathering here, and there's a eternal plan for what we're doing. Hard stuff to talk about, crazy things to think about, but it's the difference between we're just trying to change their behavior and we want them to be a part of a bigger community of what God's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, those are our 3 ideas for you to think through. Good kids, big events, matching t-shirts. We want to encourage you to keep thinking through how do you pursue health and understand the why behind the what we do in youth ministry. Thanks so much. We'll see you on the next episode. Question number 1. What language could you use to help students, leaders, and parents understand the difference between behavior change and heart transformation? Question number 2. Create a plan for how your team is going to be more intentional in engaging students during your next big event. Question number 3. What opportunities do you have to help strengthen the sense of biblical community amongst your students? Thanks for checking out Better Student Ministry. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to share it with a friend. You can always find our videos by searching Better Student Ministry on either Facebook or YouTube. And if you want to dive deeper into the content we discussed today, we've got a podcast available for you on both SoundCloud and iTunes, or on our YouTube channel. Please like, subscribe, share it with people who are around you. We hope it's been a blessing to you. If you've got questions or content you'd love us to discuss, feel free to email us at betterstudentministry@gmail.com.